Throughout human history, the concept of pacifism has independently arisen in many domains, from religious beliefs to political movements, and, if you're willing to stretch the definition, even as far as martial arts. Whether through stabbing, shooting, or even stomping your enemies, the use of violence to achieve goals has been an integral mechanic in video games since their inception. It was only natural that the concept of a pacifistic approach to gameplay would arrive sooner or later. Taking puzzle solving to the next level, as early as the 1990s, pacifist speedruns were being completed in even the most violent franchises. After all, in a community willing to embrace a challenge, what could be more challenging than completely subverting the expectations of games designed explicitly around the use of violence? As an action role-playing game, Diablo 2 has its own set of challenges that make the pacifist run seemingly unachievable. And yet, with some deep thought and a lot of patience, the speedrunning community has honed the pacifist speedrun to an art in itself. So come along as we cover the history of the pacifist speedrun in Diablo 2, as runners rack their brains in pursuit of the fastest way to defeat the Lords of Hell without ever striking a blow.
Don't randomly punch anybody. That's all that matters right now. Okay.
Dude, this is a faster Duriel kill than freaking a regular paladin. What in the world?
Hello? What? Stop farting.
While there are some games that have embraced the mechanic of non-aggression, the definition of what it means to be pacifist has certainly been stretched in some speedruns. For example, using friendly fire mechanics to get enemies to kill each other in Doom. But Diablo 2 has its own set of challenges that made planning a route through the game without ever attacking an enemy especially difficult. First, and most obviously, the end bosses of each act have to die in order to progress through the game. Okay, sure, you say. Maybe we can make an exception for those. In the lore, I'm pretty sure it says something like, killing demonic lords just disperses their life energy, and they'll recompose themselves given enough time. They're not really dead, so it's okay. Kinda. Secondly, in order to finish the game, there's an unskippable check in the game logic that means you must be level 20 to pass the Ancients quest in order to proceed and fight the final boss, Baal. The only way to get levels is by killing enemies. There's no way around it. There are no friendly fire mechanics, and Flavi is unpartied and greedily keeps all her XP to herself, so it's up to you to do it. Well, you say, the Paladin has that Thorns aura that only reflects damage, so he's not attacking, right? Sure, but this only applies to physical melee damage. Any magic or ranged attacks are unaffected, so on those enemies, you're out of luck. Finally, there's doors. Now, I know what you're thinking. Doors? That's stupid. Well, they do have health bars, and according to game logic, that means they're more than mere objects. As for who the heck decided to give doors a soul? Stuffed if I know. And so it was, for over a decade and a half, Diablo 2 was without a pacifist run. Certainly, there were build guides out there to convert to pacifism after a life of indiscriminate murder and destruction, but to come up with a way to finish the game while never attacking took some brainpower. In April 2017, a user by the name of Dr. Cliché posted a video to YouTube and a corresponding Reddit post showing a proof of concept completion of a pacifist run in Diablo 2. Rather than using a paladin for Thorns, Cliché had planned out the run to instead use a sorceress to overcome the two biggest barriers, Lord Desace and Madork, both enemies who only use ranged attacks and must be killed in order to progress. At level 24, the sorceress unlocks Chilling Armor, which passively retaliates against range attacks including Desace's magic. And while the damage provided by this was pitiful, By unlocking Cold Mastery at level 30, it quickly becomes sufficient to overcome this hurdle. The Sorceress also has the handy ability to teleport over doors, so no issue there. And by bending the rules of Diablo 2 runs to mod the game and allowing use of ladder rune words, the Edge rune word gave her a Thorns aura just like the Paladin, helping speed up the Diablo and Baal fights significantly. The trouble was, how on earth do you get to level 24, let alone level 30 in the first place? Fortunately for Cliché, the game does have a few methods of damaging enemies without ever attacking them. The magical affix of Thorns directly provides a source of attacker takes damage, so while the player is merely walking around, perhaps invading a little personal space, they're never actually attacking a monster. The monster merely hurts itself. The best source of this magical property is to get a chipped skull or two and put it into a socketed shield for some surprisingly high damage output, which can then be supplemented by gear shopped from vendors early on. In order to obtain the skulls or money to use at vendors in the first place, Cliché made use of super chests in houses in the first area of the game. Super chests are an obscure mechanic in Diablo 2, ordinary looking chests that are actually tied to specific map tiles rather than being independently generated. They always contain a large amount of loot, and since they can be found almost immediately, it was a highly effective way to get started, so long as your map is generous. With Attacker Takes Damage gear donned, it was time to get down to grinding out experience, and grinding is the most appropriate term here. Rack and Issue was the best source of early game experience, with plenty of minions who all grant 500% XP. Cliché would first use this location to get enough strength to wear all the gear possible before putting points into life, something the Sorceress desperately struggles with. After hitting level 12, the experience gained from Rack and Issue starts to drop off, so it was on to the next big super unique monster in the game, the Countess. In addition to having plenty of minions to level up on, the Countess also drops runes which would be extremely helpful. Like any good player, Cliché wanted a stealth for the obvious benefits of faster cast rate and faster run walk to make avoiding monsters and getting out of a jam easier. Ral runes would be very useful later on for fire resistance, and finally, Tal and Tear runes would form critical components of the Edge rune word he'd use later on. By level 18, the experience had once again tapered off at the Countess, and it was time to move on. Donning his stealth while checking Ykara for any staves with plus skills that may be useful, he went to inform Andariel of his intentions to peacefully convince Diablo to abandon his ways. Eventually, she talked herself into letting him continue. In Act 2, he'd target the super unique Beetle Burst to level from 18 to 24, checking in on Radamant to grab a copy of the Book of Skill. He'd also upgrade from his Attacker Takes Damage gear, shopping chance to cast Nova or Frost Nova pieces from Elzix, which at this point in the game do much more than the 1 damage from the basic of Thorns affix. Eventually, it was time to face Duriel, and given how scary he can be, only needing a single trip to town was a pretty impressive achievement. As he reached Act 3, it was time to start preparing for his negotiations with the Primevals themselves. Making sure to complete the Jade Figurine and Lamb Essence tome quests for any increases to life he could get, negotiations with Mephisto went well. And then came the critical point of the run, getting an Amrune in order to make his Edge bow. Cliché had modded his game specifically for this purpose, but it still wasn't guaranteed. The earliest an Amrune can drop is the council members at Travinkel, and he hadn't had any luck there. His best chance was the 1 in 11 shot at the Hellforge. In his rundown of the strategy, he even pointed out, if your run doesn't get an Amrune here, then it's over. So of course he got it. I mean, why would I be talking about this run otherwise? Now at this point you might think, sweet, he's got chilling armor, an edge bow, and he's in Act 4. Time to take it to Diablo. But no, the spectre of Lord Desace was too daunting. You see, something I failed to mention earlier is that Desace is the real choke point of this run. We covered off how his attacks are unaffected by Attacker Takes Damage or the Thorns aura, but the most painful part is actually caused by a bug in the game. The spell Bestow is used by greater mummies like Radamant to heal the undead monsters around them in addition to their basic ability to revive undead. For some reason, Oblivion Knights including Lord Desace were also granted this ability in the game files, but it's extremely bugged. They have no caster animation associated with it, so you have no idea who they're healing or when. The monsters aren't immediately healed, but instead just get given massive life regeneration, and they can cast it on themselves? What this leaves you with is a situation where if you're ever not paying attention, the Oblivion Knights can cast Bestow on each other or themselves and be left healing at a rate that pacifist damage could never overcome. And since Deuceace must die in order to progress, if he ever gets bestowed, you have to save and quit and start over. This was why Cliche's game plan called for getting to level 30. The bonus damage from Cold Mastery would carry the day even if things went wrong. And so it was back to Act 3 for some more XP grinding at a super unique monster. Serena in the Ruined Temple is quite similar to the Countess. With low life, lots of minions, and a guaranteed spawn, she was the perfect spot for Cliché to level up. It only took an hour. With all the leveling necessary for the run under his belt, it was time to confidently stride into the Chaos Sanctuary and... oh. Okay, so Infector still hurts. But the second try carried the day, and after a mere 32 hits from Chilling Armor, Deuceace was down. From here, it was relatively smooth sailing. Get to the Ancients and repeat the Chilling Armor trick on Madork. And while a little time consuming, it was nothing compared to the grind up to this point. A mere 37 minutes later, the first recorded pacifist run was complete, with a final time of 7 hours, 41 minutes, 33 seconds. With one grueling battle behind him, it was on to the next. Getting a pacifist leaderboard onto the Diablo 2 page on speedrun.com. With precedent pacifist categories in other games from Super Mario Bros. To Doom, it seemed like getting something similar up and running for Diablo 2 would be no problem. Alas, the mods were not so receptive to the request, with skepticism from some and a quest for precision from others, making the conversation quite contentious. In the meantime, Blazer Flamewing had also completed a pacifist run, getting a 707 without use of the ladder-only edge rune word, so that modification was banned. It was also agreed that Cliché's solution to accidentally hitting a monster, apologizing, then being sure not to kill him, wasn't going to fly if this were an official category. While verifying that there were no accidental hits in an entire 7-hour run was going to be a huge burden on the moderators, it was necessary to uphold the integrity of proper leaderboards. Thinking about the potential for other classes, eventually the group established these rules dictating what constitutes a pacifist run in Diablo 2. But even with the leaderboard set up, with a grinding and honestly very boring run that looked like at best it could get down to 6 hours, would anyone run it? Then, Cliché had a breakthrough. Experimenting with chance to cast Nova Gear, he found that so long as he could keep Deuceace from being bestowed, with 4 to 5 pieces of gear, he'd have enough damage to take Deuceace out completely passively without relying on Chilling Armor. The trick was getting someone other than Deuceace in range to hit him, proccing the Novacast and hitting Deuceace at the same time. The trouble was getting monsters to outlive Deuceace, and here suddenly Bestow changed from a bug into a feature. By spawning Infector of Chaos and getting him bestowed, Cliché would use the Paladin's Resist Fire skill to survive his attacks, and Infector would out-heal any Nova procs. With this setup and a lot of potions on the ground, Deuceace could safely if slowly be taken down by the Paladin, whose access to the Thorns aura made the rest of the game much easier. He still had the problem of doors blocking the path in Act 5, but by leveling up to 24, he could use his staff with charges of the teleport skill to skip past without issue. With this breakthrough, he massively dropped his pacifist time down to 4 hours, 2 minutes. Always up for something new, a couple of days later, Mr. Llama SC gave the run a crack. He didn't quite have the same reflexes Cliché had built up to ensure he'd never hit anything.
Whoa, why did that?
Not that it mattered in the end anyway. After luring Diablo off screen, Llama got soft-locked in a bone prison where his town portal was unreachable, and so he was trapped.
I don't care. I don't care.
A bone prison has a health bar, so the run was definitely disallowed. But nonetheless, as a top runner, Llama set a good benchmark as to what could be achieved with minimal preparation, giving Cliché something to strive for. But in the end, the new record would come neither from Cliché nor Llama, but Blazer Flamewing, the first person to take up Cliché's challenge after he posted the Sorceress run.
Yeah, no, it was basically one of those things that, because basically ever since I started watching like GDQ, that's kind of what got me into speedrunning. I really enjoyed the weird categories on them that were featured on them, and Diablo 2 didn't really have much of that. So as soon as I saw like somebody else trying to get something like that going, I jumped on it. I was like, yes, I'm all for this, and I've never really been part of like route building before, so that was kind of like the biggest.
With only 3 pieces of Nova gear rather than the recommended 4 to 5, the DeSace and Madoc fights were a slog, but he came through to secure a time of 3 hours, 42 minutes and 19 seconds on the first recorded run that's fully compliant with the leaderboard rules. A week later, on June 6, 2017, Cliché would strike back, claiming the throne he himself had established. His map knowledge was improving, although it still had some ways to go, but by forcing the 4th piece of Nova gear and getting some great experience in the Flayer jungle, he was flying. He'd gotten a good handle on how to shepherd the mages in the Chaos Sanctuary, getting them away from DeSace's area and into Infectors, and with these optimizations, plus the use of death strats during the Bale waves, he brought the record down by 19 minutes to 3 hours, 23 minutes, 28 seconds. But Blazer wasn't done. Just 4 days after Cliché took the throne, he was still grinding. Blazer was a more experienced runner, so he had a distinct advantage coming in, and he was learning from Cliché's refined strategies. He became a master of herding mages, adopted death strats, and used chip gems to transmute cheap ones into expensive ones that he could sell to fund buying the very pricey Nova gear needed to complete the run. While some of the randomly generated maps were especially punishing, others were great, and he was on a fantastic pace coming into the Chaos Sanctuary.
Oh, here we go. Or I can just die right away, and I forgot to set up a TP. Rip. That's no problem though. Oh my god, how...
But even after these deaths, his pace was still good enough to allow a recovery. And then, while fighting DeSace, he accidentally dragged an extra enemy along. It was entirely possible this would be too much damage, and he'd forgotten to drop extra potions on the ground too. But somehow, he made it, and the extra procs from the Strangler's attacks even helped recover some of the time lost to the deaths. Coming into the Diablo fight, he was 8 minutes ahead of Cliché.
No! I'm pretty 100% certain that my TP is caged right now.
Luckily, Cliché had terrible AI in his Diablo fight, spending minutes constantly shooting lightning, so Blazer didn't lose any time to the record. After that Act 4, you'd think he'd learned his lesson, but I hate to break it to you, it gets worse.
Did I make a TP? Oh my f***ing god.
This death cost Blazer over 4 minutes. Even so, he still had a shot, and so kept pressing on. He brought in a new innovation in the Ancients fight. Where previously the strategy was to get rid of Korlik and Talik as quickly as possible using Thorns, Blazer opted to strategically keep Korlik alive, switching to Cleansing as soon as Talik was dead. More attacks meant more procs, and more procs meant Madoc was down faster. Even with the earlier time losses and some bad body blocks while navigating, Blazer pulled through with a new record of 321.16. And at this point, he was alone. Cliché kept playing, but recognised he didn't have the skill to hold the record, instead preferring to cheer on any runners who'd take on the category. Llama had his fill after that single attempt. Teo wasn't going to touch it. And yet, something kept Blazer going. Over the course of the next 8 weeks, Blazer would not only set new records for the pacifist on other classes, but continue pushing the record down further and further, ironing out his mistakes, mastering when to escape to town to avoid deaths, beefing up his ancient strategy to entirely avoid use of thorns. He even came up with completely new tricks to get around roadblocks that would previously kill runs. By the end of July, Blazer had taken the record down not 1 minute or even 10, but 40. A 20% reduction from where it stood at the start of June. And then, nothing. After Blazer, basically no one would touch the Pacifist run. Teo even wondered if it was worth keeping the leaderboards. In 2019, Blazer would come back and set another record, a 632 on the Sorceress, but the 243 kept holding up. It was almost like he'd need to lock someone up in some kind of isolation to make them crazy enough to take on this challenge.
Probably the worst healthcare issue that has struck the entire world in your lifetime.
After 3 years, a few new runners had joined the scene, and one of them was willing to step up to the Pacifist challenge. Macro Bio Boy started like so many D2 runners, honing his skills on the Assassin, Druid, and Sorcerer speedruns. Looking for fertile ground to get a top spot on one of the leaderboards, he found the category tucked away, with many of the classes completely empty.
I was kind of looking at other ways to play the game because I wanted a world record. If I'm going to be completely honest with you, I wanted a world, like I started running Players 8 Necromancer normal runs because nobody else would run it. Yeah, I wanted a world record. I thought it was a really cool way of playing the game, and I went, I think I could do that. Yeah, why not?
Macro showed he was committed from the get-go. Grabbing the word for whatever the opposite of coveted is, Pacifist Barbarian record in early April 2020, he picked up the Paladin run and took it just as seriously as Blazer had. Mac could quickly bring his own innovations to the run, grabbing a wand with weaken charges to reduce the amount of potions used in the late game, and starting the early game on a non-expansion character, increasing the chances of skulls and attacker takes damage gear dropping. With these minor tweaks, he quickly got up to speed, and on May 15, 2020, he completed a run that was just 41 seconds behind Blazer's 243. So, with someone else finally stepping up to the challenge, Blazer came back to firm up his position. The day after Macro's run, Blazer booted up his stream and things were off to an amazing start. Now, I know what you D2 experts out there are thinking. Stout Nail! Wow, an attacker takes damage weapon! But no, this was only Fel Oak. But the huge lightning resistance this gave was a big help in leveling at Rakan on Act 2 Beetles and for the Diablo fight. He also got Hasaris boots off Andariel and was flying through. But the real game changer was actually a theory Macro Bio Boy had developed, one that would drastically speed up the Desace fight.
I'm trying to think of exactly why I started looking at the Stranglers, other than, like, maybe it just kind of worked out one run. In a run, I just started using them, and I noticed that they were able to resist enough of the damage. They were pretty easy to kind of manage and survive. That was the big thing. They're just so much easier to survive, and it allows you to use Cleansing Aura, whereas before you would typically have to use Resist Fire Aura so that you could survive Infector. The benefit of the Cleansing Aura is that it gets rid of curses and poison whenever Lord Desace randomly just shoots out like a spectral hit or whatever and like happens to poison you, drastically increasing your ability to kind of handle the situation. And then on top of that, Weaken Wand works directly to counteract the damage from the Stragglers, whereas it doesn't do anything for the Inferno from Infector. And then on top of that, it doesn't require as much setup. It's also easier to pull the Stranglers because they'll actually fly across the gap, as opposed to needing to get routed around like Infector. And again, I don't know exactly what led me to use them instead, other than the potential time save. But the use of Stranglers actually is like not only just easier, but with good enough gear and resistances, you can actually survive 3 of them simultaneously with a Weaken Wand. Basically, like quadrupling the output of Nova casts because they attack so much faster than a single Infector would. So like, ultimately it is just strictly better, and I'm glad that we just understand that now.
Working out a few of the kinks in picking up the new techniques, Blazer cruised into a new record of 236.51 and was confident that there were more gains to be found.
Yeah, no, it was great. I was pretty happy that somebody else picked it up, just so I had a reason to play it again.
About a week later, Blazer would get his chance. With great maps, excellent XP, and a better handle on how the Strangler AI works, he took down Diablo an hour and 42 minutes into the run. And then the game crash reverted his save file to before the Diablo fight and before Desace. The run was unrecoverable. And the pacifist scene was hotting up. Macro kept pushing and more people were trying out the runs, including the creator of a Diablo 2 streaming tool, Zutatensuper, who was filling out every class from the Barbarian to the Amazon. It wasn't just Cliché and Blazer anymore. Even Llama gave Pacifist another shot. So Blazer wasn't going to give up. On June 26, 2020, he came back with an excellent run, even if it wasn't on pace with his previous attempt. He ditched the classic start strats from the previous record, opting for the high-risk strategy of a single tower run hoping for Tal and Eth from the Countess to get faster run walk from the stealth rune word. It didn't pay off. But what saved it was getting the coveted 6 pieces of Nova gear. Something I haven't emphasized enough in this run is the amount of time sunk into shopping for gear. You can easily spend 10 or more minutes shopping for pieces of gear that Chance to Cast Nova can appear on. A belt, boots, chest piece, helm, gloves, and a shield. Usually, runners had burned so much time shopping that they'd move ahead with just 4 pieces, wishing for 5. But this time, Blazer managed to fill every slot. Still, coming into the Chaos Sanctuary, the game was pushing back. The monster density was huge, and despite the massive DPS advantage, he was only 2 minutes ahead on the Desace split. But in the last 3 years, some speedrunning tech had advanced. In grinding for the normal Barbarian world record, the runner Bender Meets Fry had figured out a cheese strategy for Diablo that always kept him in melee range but kept you safe from his most devastating attacks. By adopting this trick, Blazer was able to pick up a further 2-minute time save even with the terrible monster density. With the extra Nova damage, he picked up another 4-minute save at the Ancients fight, and with clean drags on the Bale waves came in with a new record 10 minutes ahead of the old one at 2:26:31, creating plenty of breathing space between him and Macro. But Macro had more to offer the Pacifist run than just his excellent theory crafting skills. A couple of months later, Macro pushed a strategy not seen since Cliché's early days on the Paladin, forcing stealth through repeated tower runs. Unlike Blazer, Macro wasn't going to leave it as a one-and-done Countess attempt. After 3 Countess runs, you can expect to get Taloneth about half the time. But still, run after run, Macro just couldn't get her most common drop, a single Tal rune. Finally, after 6 runs, she dropped what he needed, but he was 16 minutes behind the record. However, he had been leveling up the whole time, and not long into Act 2, he was able to start shopping, ending up with 6 pieces of Nova gear on par with Blazer, while also rolling +2 to Vigor on a Scepter using the chipped gem recipe. A fantastic boost to his running speed.
You're so fast. Oh, the zoomies.
Coming out of the Juriel fight, he was back to only 5 minutes behind the record. Still a huge gap, but getting a great marsh skip and some amazing experience in the Flayer jungle helped him close the gap to just 2 minutes going into Act 4. If he could just get a low density Chaos Sanctuary, he still had a shot. Fortunately, the monster density thinned out as he got past the entry. With a couple of months more practice at the Strangler strategy, Max spent less time shopping excess potions, and somehow after the Diablo fight he was 3 minutes ahead of the record. But then, the old foe of Pacifist runs reared its head.
Alright, that's fine. Oh my god.
With this and some rough map navigation, things were tight after the Ancients fight. Running into Bale, he was reliant on good AI RNG. He couldn't afford any clones or slip-ups. As Bale struck his final blow, the timer stopped, and after being over 15 minutes behind at the end of Act 1, Mac had done it. A new world record of 2 hours, 25 minutes and 24 seconds. A minute faster than the previous record.
It was incredibly gratifying, very fulfilling in a way that I wasn't expecting it to be. So like I started this off, I went, I wanted a world record. Like I wanted something to put my name on, because at the time you had all of the best runners who have ever run Diablo 2 actively competing in a lot of ways that like so outclassed me that I was getting disheartened. And the pacifist run was something that enabled me in the way that I kind of approach Diablo at this point in my career, which is just from like a highly like knowledge-based way of playing the game, like trying to break as many things as possible and seeing how these very niche things kind of fit together. And the pacifist run kind of exemplified all of that. It used mechanics nobody else really understood other than like Blaze and Cliché at the point. But getting the world record in a thing where I felt like I legitimately sat down and went, I'm going to be the best at doing this thing, and then have it happen while there was still active competition. It's absolutely my most favorite run where I have that little gold next to my name, because it just like so exemplifies how I play video games.
To this day, the record is held. There seems to be room for further improvement, but Mac's brief revival of the category flagged after that point. Zutat and Super finished off filling out the leaderboards, and recently Diagi has posted the first hardcore pacifist run. But with most of the speedrunning community shifting over to Diablo 2 Resurrected since 2021, there's been little action at the top of the pacifist leaderboards. Macro BioBoy had revived the category, and almost fittingly killed it. Will someone new come back to the old game to challenge it again? Time will tell. So what about Resurrected then? Well, since patch 2.4 there's actually been a huge buff to the Paladin's Thorns aura, offering both flat attacker takes damage on top of the percent damage reflected, making leveling much faster. While this has enticed a few runners to try out the run, only one has truly been pushing the record. This guy.
So let's see. So pacifist, like, I just really liked the idea of it. It just seemed like a decent change of pace, because I think I was getting tired of doing the PX Paladin stuff that I've been grinding a lot on. And so a class that I was familiar with, but a very, very different and very chilled way to play.
Adopting the attacker takes damage shopping, stealth farming, and weaken wand strategies from Macro's record, Sliv started using the run as a decompression tool between the more intense Players X Paladin or Sorcerer speedruns. After a few tries, he got to a position where he was using the buffs to Thorns to get through the game much quicker, and started the dreaded Act 2 shopping earlier than any of the LOD runs. At the very end of 2022, he got a run really going, starting shopping at level 18 less than 50 minutes into the run. And then, the game punished him. After 12 minutes of shopping, he also got a 4th Way Arcane and no Marsh skip. Still, he closed out the run with a time of 2 hours 23 minutes, a great starting benchmark for a category that didn't even exist on the D2R leaderboards. He even brought his own bit of flavour to the run.
Alright, kettle's boiled. It's gonna be time to make another mug.
So I think it was on my first ever completed run, and I got to Madlock, and I was just standing there, getting hit with axes, looking at my timer, just wondering. And then I just went, heck it, got up, boiled a kettle, came back, did it in stages, made a cup of tea, just drank a potion every time I came back. It was fine. Like Maddock does like 200 damage while you got boiling the kettle, so it's fine. And then it like was able to enjoy a cup of tea for the bell fight, which is great. And so I've done that every run ever since, and like included in my splits now. As soon as I start, as soon as the battle fight starts, yep. Timer starts. How long does it take me to brew a cup of tea?
To this day, he continues running, and with the help of some better shopping luck, has since brought it down much further, going from 216 to 215, 213, and most recently a 206. As for macro, he's given the pacifist run in D2R a few shots, but not managed to top Sliv's time. But he did pull off something truly insane. A 32-hour run, all the way through the Hell difficulty.
Let's go! Yes!
If you haven't watched it, I strongly recommend checking out his video covering the run. I've linked it in both the notes and a pinned comment. In fact, this run revealed a pretty dramatic flaw in the assumptions behind the pacifist run. You see, everything I told you about Bestow earlier, it was completely wrong. Instead, there's a totally separate bug affecting the Seal bosses, where even if no Oblivion Knights are around, if you unload them from memory by disengaging and getting them off screen for over 8 seconds, they'll start regenerating their health. This explains why their healing patterns were different to the actual Bestow spell, and needless to say, it really screwed Mac in this run.
I guess that's the second interesting thing to note. The game doesn't start regenerating until the monster takes damage, even if they're not at full life, which is a weird facet of how it works. So you can actually get them really low and then deactivate them and come back and they won't start regenerating yet. But the moment that you deal damage to a super unique monster who's been deactivated, they start regenerating according to their base monster stat. And that's been the problem that we've been trying to fight in this speedrun for all of these years, is just a weird bug about how the game reloads monsters and nothing to do with Bestow, which is like so humbling. The amount of years that I've explained the deep mechanics of Bestow to players, just for it to be nothing, was a fun eureka moment to have 21 hours into a speedrun, for sure.
There's also been even more experimentation with the pacifist category. In fact, as recently as April 2023, there was the first completed multiplayer pacifist run, all the way through Hell in under 5 hours. But even with this recent momentum, keeping it up is going to be a challenge. There remain many questions for the future of the pacifist run. Can Slovenius keep it up in Resurrected? Will someone get the sub 220 that seems so possible in LOD? The history of the pacifist run shows that community is key. While Blazer had cliché egging him on to keep pushing the record lower, new optimizations were found and even completely new insights about the game were uncovered. But when that enthusiasm ran out, it took 3 years for Macro to rediscover the category and rekindle the flames of innovation, and that only lasted about 6 months. There's much to be said about what's really a pacifist run. If you're causing your enemies to take damage at all, is it really pacifist? But there's plenty of precedents in other games to justify the particular rule set the D2 leaderboards have adopted. I mean, maybe banning breaking doors is a bit extreme, but you need a line somewhere. What really makes it interesting though, is the forced constraint. Unlike many other games, Diablo 2 is fairly light on game-breaking glitches, so most categories of runs are just tweaks on the same theme. Diablo 2 has around 100 different categories to speedrun, but there's no real 0-star equivalent. While many players have created their own constraints to keep the game fresh and interesting, be it simple things like off-meta builds, or even challenge runs like no hit, no healing, or naked playthroughs, none of these have really had the same opportunity for optimizing for speed that the pacifist has. Speedrunning itself takes a lot of thought on routing and optimization, and category extensions only add to the creative space. The pacifist run at a surface level looks like one of the dumbest in D2 speedrunning, but really it takes just as much talent and brain power as any other, even if it requires a bit more patience.
You learn just how long a mechanic can stay alive for a long time. It's genuinely a really fun category. Dano, stop bitching out. Good category.
Interestingly enough, the pacifist run is what has led me to understand item generation and crafting and rare affixes and all of that. to the level that I do now. Like, if there was one thing that I quote unquote think I might be one of the best at, is understanding how items become the items that they are in the game. And it was all because of the pacifist run.
So, Blazer, if you were to try to convince someone to do the pacifist run, what would you say?
That's a good question. Because it's not really a run I would recommend to anybody.